For evil geniuses, minions, laser weapons, and submarine platforms, please watch your step. On the other hand, this wasn't a secret lair, at least not in the James Bond way. Security would be more corporate than military, relying more on access cards and sensors than guards and guns. This structure would have been built according to government specs or building codes or whatever it was that the Quinlans had. The building Bridget and I had investigated on Quinn had an emergency staircase. Betcha this place did too. And yes, there it was, but it was locked. I didn't feel like forcing it, and in fact might not be able to. The construction seemed a little more solid than my previous experience, and it was probably alarmed. In went the fleas, and a few seconds later the alarm sensor was jammed and the door sprung open. I couldn't leave it unlatched like that, but I could instruct the fleas to permanently disable the locking mechanism. The emergency staircase was permalit, as such structures always are. The sociological and behavioral parallels between totally unrelated civilizations was a never-ending source of amazement to me. I wished for a moment we could find a couple more technological species so we'd have more samples to compare. Which was all very interesting, but maybe I should concentrate on sneaking into the evil lair for now. I took a moment to format a report and send it off to the group. It would hopefully help Hugh to zero in on the entrance if and when he got near the mountains. I got to the next level down and sent a flea under the door for a quick peek. No one around. Excellent. Opening the door as quietly as possible, I stuck my head out and peered around, then stepped through. From here on, there was no point in sneaking around. Nothing says intruder like acting furtive. Nope, I belonged here. In fact, I owned the place. I stood tall, stuck my chest out, and strutted down the hall with a bounce in my step, my spiders and fleas hurriedly hopping on board. The place had a lived-in feel. The air wasn't stale or musty, no dust. The lights were all functioning. Everything was neatly in its place. That could just be good automated systems, but if that was the case, I was back to square one. Bad news. This installation was probably huge, as it would serve many purposes relating to the care and maintenance of Heaven's River, and the Resistance would probably be using a very small part of it. Or maybe not. I might be about to go off on another Vizzini rant, but the Quinlans had good automation, as evinced by their outer space cleanup crews. Chances were that maintenance of Heaven's River would be mostly automated as well. Otherwise, the administrator would have to let too many people into the inner circle. I couldn't see a secret ruling cabal composed of hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of janitors and plumbers working for long, let alone for generations. No. Most of this installation would be related to automation, storage for, and maintenance of. The Quinlan-friendly areas would be few, mostly intended for supervisory purposes and mostly near the elevators. That was the way humans would have done it, and I was pretty confident by this point that Quinlans and humans were very similar in a lot of ways. I stopped and waited, but Vizzini didn't seem inclined to offer up a counterpoint. Good. And as it turned out, my neurotic arguments with myself were a good thing, because as I was standing there waiting for a counter-argument, I heard a noise. Not much of one. In fact, I couldn't say exactly what I'd heard, even when I played it back. It could be nothing, or it could be people. I voted for people. The fleas and spiders were getting a lot of use, and I was aware that some of them required some maintenance downtime. I might need all hands on deck if things got tense, so I swallowed all but one spider, who was still in good shape, and instructed it to move ahead of me and peek around corners. I still picked up the occasional noise, which was beginning to sound more like Quinlan voices as I zeroed in on the source. "Hey, Bob, you got a sec?" I almost jumped out of my fur. If there'd been a cybernetic version of a heart attack, I'd be having one. "Not right now, Bill. I'm kind of busy sneaking into Dr. Evil's hideout." "Oh, okay. Call me back when you have time." "Will do." I terminated the call, swallowed my metaphorical heart, and resumed following the spider. At the next corner, the voices abruptly became much clearer, and I could now hear occasional furniture noises, feet scraping on the floor, things banging together, stuff like that. I was probably very close. I didn't want to rush in and stab everyone, and depending on numbers, I might not be able to. Hi, Bob. Where are you right now? Unfucking believable. I'd been dead for 300 years, and I was still getting phone calls. I gritted my teeth and took a calming breath before replying, Hey, Hugh, I'm a little busy right now. Can I call you back? Sure thing. I hung up. Again? And searched for a Do Not Disturb button. And found one, of course. No Bob would design a comm system without one. I wondered why I'd failed to pick up on that before. The spider went around the final corner and peeked through the door. The video feed showed 4 Quinlans sitting around a table shuffling paper. By which I mean some were reading, some were writing, but everyone had paper and pens. It was almost homey in a way. I wondered about the low-tech process, but then maybe they were worried about the security of electronic systems. I had no way of knowing how far the administrator's reach really was. Conversations were unhurried and mixed with long silences. The attendees didn't appear to be depressed or anything, just concentrating. It mostly consisted of remarks about segment numbers and member statuses and activities. I listened for a few moments, then decided I should find a place to hide. Surveillance seemed like a good idea, and that would be up the spout if one of them walked out and found me standing there. I sent a freshly refurbished spider out to replace my current observer. Then I went looking, as quietly as possible, for a hiding place. I was in an office just around the corner, curled up under a desk. It wasn't original or particularly imaginative, but it was good enough to hide me from anything short of a concerted search. And that would happen only if I screwed up and made my presence known. As an android, I could stay perfectly still, didn't need to eat or go to the bathroom, and didn't get stiff. On the other hand, I needed results. I sent all my spiders out to scout around the complex. It was a little bit of a risk, as they were big enough to be visible from yards away if they were moving, but otherwise the camouflage function would make them very difficult to pick out. However, the Quinlans didn't appear inclined to move around a lot either. One had gone to find a restroom, and another had brought out snacks from a refrigerator, but that was it. I wondered to what extent the Resistance members actually belonged in this complex, and to what extent they were just living in the corners like rats. Could the administrator monitor activity in here? If so, why had he not taken steps to clean it out and reclaim it? If not, why weren't the Resistance everywhere in here? I got a partial answer almost right away when one of the spiders blundered into a dormitory. Bunk beds lined the walls, some currently in use. The sleepers brought the confirmed population up to 10, although there were enough spaces for up to 18. I had the spider do a visual sweep, then back out slowly. A couple of spiders had found big industrial metal doors. I wondered if those led to all the automation and maintenance equipment, assuming I'd gotten it right. I hoped they hadn't put Bender back there. If I had to go a-visiting, it would increase my risk dramatically. But it didn't seem likely. The Resistance probably had a better grip on the space on this side of the doors. I decided it was time to return some calls. The spiders could operate autonomously, and they'd squawk if there was an issue. First, Bill. Hey, Bob. So, what was all the excitement? I'm in Resistance HQ, as near as I can tell, sniffing around. No sign of Bender yet? Not yet. I'm still confident of our logic, but there's always the possibility that we're just dead wrong and he's somewhere else. At the other end of the segment, maybe? I don't see how. Halep's Ending is only a few miles away, and that's the name that Bender said they used a lot. The only other possibility is if there's some other hideout in the area. So, what were you calling about? Just an update on the war against Starfleet. We've basically pushed them into a corner network-wise. Most of the equipment they hacked has either been cleaned or destroyed and is being replaced. But here's the funny thing. Yes? I've had conversations with members of Starfleet over the course of several confrontations and negotiations. Everyone I've talked to is as surprised and perplexed by the degree of infiltration as we are. They all give the same story, that this came completely out of the blue. They have no idea who actually did all the hacking. Oh, hell. Bill, I wonder if we're really clean right now. I mean, the Skippies are good, but so is whoever engineered this. What if this someone has as much processing power or even more? Or what if it's a faction within the Skippies playing both sides? As I said that, I realized that I'd never consciously suspected the Skippies, but that I'd had misgivings. Otherwise, why would I have put that monitor in the drones way back when? Way ahead of you. I resurrected an archived source version of my comms from before there were even any Skippies or Starfleet and did a diff, then recompiled. So I'm demonstrably clean. And your temporary relay has never been corrupted. This conversation, at least, is probably secure. Good. You'll have to get all the Bobs to do their own cleanup and reestablish encryption keys. It's going to take a while. All under control, Bob. I just wanted to let you know on the QT. We exchanged a few other comments, then I signed off. There'd been something off about Hugh's behavior since the beginning, but unless they were clairvoyant, I didn't see how they could be planning for anything that was going on. Unless it really had nothing to do with the Quinlans. But then what? Of course, it might not be the Skippies at all. Well, my next call was to Hugh, and I'd be watching for any weirdness. Hugh here. Hey, Hugh, it's Bob. I finally have a few milliseconds to rub together. What were you calling me about? Well, we sailed into East Point early today, and I cashed out. The captain offered me a bonus to stay. I guess I'm a good worker. Hugh's voice carried a bit of suppressed laughter. I could relate. Take our Bobbian obsessiveness, add in the strength and stamina of a Manny, and the cargo was probably getting stacked with mathematical precision. Anyway, he continued, I'd read your latest blog entry, and I had an idea. I wondered if there would be a similar entrance on the downstream side of the mountains so that maintenance personnel could get in from either side of the gorge. It seemed like it would be a reasonable design, and I was right. So, anyway, I'm in, and so far at least there's no one home at this location. No one? At all? At all. I'm thinking the administrator relies primarily on automation. Possibly the most lackadaisical despot I've ever heard of. Makes me wonder what the Resistance is actually resisting. Have they ever tried just going ahead and building a steam engine? That's rhetorical, right? You've met Quinlans who've been scattered. Yeah. So, you'll let me know if you find anything? Will do, boss. Out. Well, that wasn't particularly weird. Maybe he was having a good day, or maybe he was lying through his teeth. Great! Now paranoia had me going around in tight little circles. I was going to have to stick to what I could control and not worry about the rest. Somehow. One of my spiders bleeped me. I pulled up its video window and almost did an actual double take. On a table surrounded by jury-rigged electronics sat a version 2 replicant Matrix. It sat on a version 2 Heaven vessel Matrix cradle, making any possibility of convergent design a non-starter. If that wasn't enough, the English labels on some of the surfaces supplied the kill shot. Bender. He was still powered up. It was good to know that they hadn't cut off communications by shutting him down, or worse. Of more concern was the lack of any of the electronics necessary for maintaining a VR. That meant that Bender had been here for more than 130 years without a pseudo-physical reality. That hadn't worked out well for Henry or for Medeiros. Yet Bender had seemed reasonably well adjusted when I talked to him, which gave me hope. Now, how to get him out? Let's see. I'd traveled several miles through the river from Halip's Ending, which I'd have to retrace on land, carrying a large, ungainly matrix the whole way. I'd have to take the train back to Garrick's Spine and hope I didn't run into anyone, Then I'd have to get picked up and flown out without getting blown up by the administrator's guardians. Oh, and yes, I'd first have to get him out of the Resistance's lair, and all of this without getting spotted by the administrator, crew, or the Resistance while fending off questions from curious random Quinlans. No sweat! I had the spider look around the room while I called one of the others over to act as lookout. Once I was sure that I couldn't be surprised by a Quinlan unexpectedly showing up, I sent the spider down to the Matrix. As with the emergency door, no matter how complex your electronics, eventually it has to interface with the physical world. In this case, you have to convert sound to electricity or electricity to sound. I quickly found the microphone and speaker used to interact with Bender, along with a camera that presumably gave a video input. Nearby was a twin of the Motorola box from my earlier incarceration. So, pretty low tech. They simply had Bender talk into the mic, just like a live person. Made sense, I guess. That way they could monitor what he was saying and hearing. From my point of view, though, it meant I could jack into the system without endangering Bender. A couple of minutes spent tracing wires, and the spider had wired itself into Bender's comms. Bender? There was a short delay, then... Bob? Right here, buddy, more or less. How are you doing? Pretty damn good right now. How are you talking to me? I took a few seconds to explain the situation, and Bender laughed. Man, that is some mighty fine Rube Goldberg. I tip my hat to you. Listen, how are you doing? I didn't see your VR hardware. Yeah, I get where you're going. I've been frame-jacking myself down to my lowest rate whenever possible. For me, it's been a couple of minutes since our last conversation, including dialogues with my captors, so I'm not going stir-crazy yet, although I really would love a coffee. I hear that. So anyway, I'm trying to figure out how to get you out of here. I don't know how much you know about where here is, but the big problem is to get your Matrix through 4,000 miles of megastructure, underwater most of the way, without rusting or shorting you out or getting caught by... well, both sides, I guess. You could take transit. I laughed. I took transit to get here. And hopefully I'll be taking the train back to Garrick, but first I have to get back to the train station with you in tow. Ah, gotcha. Yeah. I stole a security card that works on the train. How is it that a Resistance member has one of those anyway? What do you think I've been doing for the last 100 years? They've had me figuring out the electronics and devising ways to hack things and hide them from the administrator. This has included registering Resistance members on the crew rolls. As long as we're on that subject, I'm still a bit unclear on the whole political situation here. Okay. Well, the Resistance has been operating almost since the day the administrator took over. They were scientists, engineers, and technicians back then. Their descendants are still maintaining the fight, but educating each new generation has been spotty, so they've lost a lot as knowledge domains shrink. I've been helping with the gaps. In most cases, I don't think the administrator even realizes it's been subverted. What about real crew? Do they use the trains? A little bit. Most crew is strictly local, used only for muscle when it's necessary to interact with the population. They know even less than the Resistance. On the other hand, they're paid better. Bender chuckled. There are, of course, people who belong to both groups. I'm sure the administrator suspects this, which is why it keeps them in the dark as much as possible. So is the administrator a hereditary position, or is it a committee? How do they stay trained from one generation to the next? There was silence for several seconds. Jeez, Bob, I thought you knew. The administrator isn't a Quinlan. It's an artificial intelligence. What the... I seemed to be getting a lot of metaphorical gut punches lately, and I quelled an urge to stand up and scream invective into the air. Suddenly, the Skippies had a motive. Bender, I have to phone Bill back in a few. Without waiting for a response, I composed a text. It would be easier to just lay it out and let Bill absorb that before responding. I fired off the message. Sorry about that. This is kind of important news. I had to let Bill know. Wait, when will he get the message? Is he in this system? I laughed. Instantaneous FTL communication, buddy. One of many things you'll have to get used to. Wow. That sure puts a different spin on the universe. At that moment, I got a response from Bill. Explains a lot, altering strategies as appropriate. So, I could probably get Bender back to our entrance location. I could probably do it without alerting Hugh. This was good. On the other hand, Hugh, oh shit. Guppy, has Hugh interacted with the equipment in any way?
Hugh has given instructions for construction and deployment of stealth drones.
No other interactions?
None.
Well, that was good. Guppy, monitor all communications with Hugh, disallow control of local maintenance or infrastructure systems, especially roamers. Confirm all orders from him with me before implementing.
Acknowledged.
If Hugh had already subverted Guppy in some way, I was probably hooped, but I couldn't see how he could alter firmware without some board swapping and a full system restart. So for the moment, I would continue to act as if I was in control. And there would be an audit in my future. And I couldn't just stop interacting with Hugh. He was in charge of the local observation drones and was the only other Bob who was in a position to run one of the Quinlan Mannies. I would just have to be careful about what I asked of him. Bob, you still there? Oh, I guess I'd gone radio silent for a few moments. Sorry, Bender, just got a response from Bill, and now things are way more complicated. Not your problem, though, right now. Do you know how to get to the train station? No, sorry. I do know there's one in this complex, though. In the complex? So I could have skipped Halip's ending entirely? Well, it made sense, although I wasn't sure what destination I would have asked for. In any case, I wasn't going to just grab Bender and start running around at random. I guess I'd have to let the spiders finish mapping. 6 hours later, and there wasn't anything even vaguely resembling a transit station. Ideas, Bender? Sorry, Bob, I was offline when they brought me in. It could be any number of levels down. Oh, hell, I said, interrupting Bender. I forgot about the elevator. I guess you took the stairs or you wouldn't be here. I frowned. How so? Cameras on the elevators. The people on site will know the moment an elevator is in use. Can they override the elevators? No, but they'll be alerted, and we'll be waiting when the doors open. Great. So stairs all the way. Bender, I don't like this. I'm going to have to spend a god-awful amount of time just looking around to find our escape route with all the risk of being seen. I got nothing, Bob. Sorry. Okay. Do you have any more info on the trains, how often they run, whether calling one will alert the resistance, stuff like that? Bender sighed. Sorry, Bob, no info. I'm not trying to be difficult. Like I said, I was offline. Going with my theory that Quinlans and humans designed things generally the same, I went all the way to the bottom level first. Nope. Turned out that's where they kept all the pipes and valves and conduits, which, it occurred to me, was probably the same as with human construction. Derp. The next level up was a hit, though. A single, long, antiseptic hallway very similar to the transit station near Halip's ending led to the boarding area with its 10 doors. In this boarding area, though, there was a prominent button attached to the wall, clearly jury-rigged, with wires leading into a hole. That had probably been added by the resistance and probably bypassed the card readers, perhaps to allow people without cards to use the train. Ideally, I should press the button now and have a train ready when I came back down with Bender, but did it alert the people upstairs when pressed? If so, I'd never get anywhere near Bender's location. Like it or not, I was going to have to commit to a strategy based on nothing but gut feelings. I couldn't risk trying the call button now. I would have to take my chances and get back here with Bender before testing the system. Now, could I get Bender's matrix from his room to here without anyone noticing? I headed back to Bender's room, making sure to check for any Quinlans taking an unscheduled stroll. As soon as I was assured the coast was still clear, I recalled all my fleas and spiders. I wouldn't get another chance to restock from the underwater Mannies, so I was going to be especially careful with this set. I sat down in front of Bender. Good news, buddy. I found the train station. Bad news? We've still got a lot of unknowns and risk. I don't think we have a choice. Honestly, Bob, I don't see myself staying sane if I'm stuck here forever. Even frame jacking can only delay the inevitable. I think I'd rather go out in a dramatic chase scene, you know? I chuckled in response. Okay, so I'm just going to deactivate you, grab you, and run downstairs to the train station. How's that sound? What it lacks in elegance, it makes up for with wads of unearned optimism. Let's do it. I walked over to the Matrix, put my finger to the power button, and paused. And Bender, if this all goes to hell, I'm glad I found you. Me too, buddy. See you in the next life. I pressed the button and Bender powered down. The latches released smoothly, and I had his Matrix under my arm. The replicant Matrix wasn't a bunch of exposed circuitry, even in its first iteration back on Earth. There was a case of sorts, and even the connection bus had a flip-off cover, but like a hard drive from the good old days, if you put it in your backpack and smacked it on walls and dropped it on the floor, you could expect problems, so no backpack ride. The current iteration was a cube, about 8 inches on a side, not too bulky, but pretty heavy. A Quinlan or a human would need to use both hands to carry it. Feeling a rush of unearned optimism, I shifted the cube for comfort, turned the corner, and ran right into a Quinlan. Unbelievable. This twerp must have left the committee room right behind the spider that had been on surveillance. Why was he here? Maybe he'd intended to talk to Bender about something. We stared at each other in shock for a frozen eternity. Then, just as his eyes moved toward the Matrix under my arm, I punched him in the solar plexus. That is really becoming a habit, I thought to myself. The Quinlan said, "Oof," and sank slowly to the floor, trying to draw a breath. Thank the universe for convergent physiology. At least he couldn't yell out a warning. Then, from up the hall, "Matthew, you okay?" Oh, for crying out loud. I'd never get the second trank gun. I had a trank gun. I pulled it out of the pouch on the side of my backpack, leveled it at the second Quinlan who was just coming into view, and dropped him. Then I pointed down at my first victim. I hoped the close range wouldn't create a problem, and put one into his butt. Amazingly, he found just enough breath to shriek in pain and very probably mortification. "Matthew? Jeff? What?" Oh, great balls of fire. I was just riling them up more. Time to make tracks. Fortunately, they weren't between me and the stairs, but I had to come into view to get there. As I turned the next corner and sprinted down the hall, I could hear cries of alarm behind me. Well, Bender, you wanted a chase scene. Wish granted. I hit the stairway door at speed and sprinted down the steps, taking them 3 at a time. Quite a feat for a Quinlan. My pursuers wouldn't be able to match that. As I passed the second level down, I heard them come through the door above me. A quick calculation indicated I wouldn't be able to get the door closed quickly enough to throw them off, which meant it would be a straight chase to the train platform. I was faster, pound for pound, but they would be able to run on all fours, not being burdened with a replicant Matrix. In retrospect, maybe the backpack idea wasn't so bad. I hit the train floor, pushed through the stairway door, and made for the platform with every erg of power I could squeeze out of the internal power systems. I calculated I'd have about 30 seconds lead time when I got there. Sure hoped a train was waiting. There were yells behind me as my pursuers piled out of the stairwell, and a ping tinkle as a tranquilizer flechette skipped a few times along the floor near me. Way out of range, but I shouldn't be surprised they'd try. I hoped Bender's case was strong enough to stop one of those things, just in case it came down to a shootout. And speaking of, I had no idea how many shots I had left. You know, things never got like this when I used to write software. I made it to the call button and jabbed it frantically, though if the design was anything like a human elevator button, this would just slow down the train's arrival, and nothing was going to convince me otherwise. The sounds of galloping Quinlans drifted down the long antiseptic corridor. My 30 seconds were almost up. I turned, drew my trank gun, and shot the lead Quinlan just as he came into range. He went down with a yelp and skidded to a stop on his face. The others hit the brakes and backpedaled frantically. Then 2 of them went up on hind legs and pulled guns of their own. Just as I was steeling myself for a toe-to-toe shootout, there was a ding behind me and the sound of a door opening. I turned and jumped through the door, looking around for a button, a control panel, anything. A female voice said, "Destination." Oh, great. Halup's ending. There was another ding, and the door began sliding closed, just as a flechette flew in and struck me in the arm. Ow, son of a bitch! "Is medical assistance required?" "No, let's go, please." "Please have a seat. Acceleration will begin in 8 seconds, said the train. Eep. I plunked myself on the nearest seat, placed Bender on my lap, and examined the wound. Small, neat hole, penetration about a half-inch. It was actually a nicely tuned weapon. Internal systems were already breaking down the flechette and starting repairs. There were no windows in the tube train, a view of a tube not being particularly inspiring, but it meant I wasn't able to see my pursuers as I pulled away from the station. I imagine they'd call a train as well, but could they follow this one? Could they ask the train attendant to let them off at the same platform? Train voice, can I specify a destination to be the same as the train in front of us? There is no train in front of us. I examined the ceiling briefly. Can occupants of a train behind us ask to be let off at the same station as us without specifying it by name? Yes. Shit. I do not understand that command. Never mind, thank you. How far behind us will the next train arrive? It will arrive at the same location, not behind us. How many seconds after our arrival will the next train arrive? There is a mandated interval of 112 seconds between train departures and the next arrival. Oh, much better. Thank you, no more questions. So, I had just a shade under 2 minutes, that being the human translation of the Quinlan time unit, VEC, to get out of Dodge or implement whatever strategy I came up with. I'd asked to go to Halup's Ending in a panic, but really I wanted to go to Garrick's Spine. But if I asked to go there, would they have a welcoming committee waiting? We'd already seen more than enough evidence that the Resistance's communications were efficient and far-reaching. Could I pull a fast one? Train voice, can I change my destination choice before we arrive? Yes, but it may still be necessary to stop at the original destination first, depending on traffic. Can we leave without opening the doors? Not if passengers are waiting. Are passengers waiting? Yes. Uh-oh. Those would either be Resistance or, less likely, crew. Neither group was likely to welcome me with open arms. Well, yes, they would, but not for hugs. I was going to have to put on some serious speed, which meant that Bender would have to go in the backpack. I just hoped that A, the Matrix would fit, and B, I could tighten it down enough to prevent damage from jostling. A frantic minute of fooling with the backpack resulted in a partial success. I was able to fit Bender in and tighten the straps, but I had to abandon most of the contents to make space and to prevent them banging around. So, goodbye, flechette gun, extra knives, money. In a moment of inspiration, I swallowed some coins. My artificial stomach could be turned off, preserving the coins intact, but I didn't want to swallow too many and end up jingling when I moved. The train began deceleration phase, and I looked around frantically. Train voice, which door will be closest to one or the other edge of the platform? The door 3 to your left or the door 6 to your right. I dashed to my left, dropped to all fours, and went into a sprinter's crouch. I had to hope I could clear the vestibule before they could get everyone over to my end. The train pulled smoothly to a stop and the doors swooshed open. I immediately gave it all the gas I could, frame-jacking just enough to be able to evaluate the situation. I immediately evaluated that there were 4 Quinlans standing right in front of the door holding a net. I changed direction slightly and barreled into one of the net holders, knocking him over backward. I launched off his forehead and galloped down the hallway. A quick glance backward, rolling my eyes instead of turning my head, revealed that there were enough Quinlans to cover all 10 doors. That was a lot of personnel to bring to bear on very little notice. Where did they come from? That was a question for another time, a much calmer time filled with cups of coffee and purring cats. For now, I needed to amscray. I hit the emergency staircase door and began nearly flying up the stairs. I had to hope they wouldn't be cover. 2 flechettes hit me before I could react. Damn it! The gun-toting Quinlans stood in front of me, their eyes slowly getting wider as they realized that I was approaching way too fast and I wasn't slowing down. By this point, I'd pretty much perfected the run-them-down maneuver, and I didn't even break stride. I noticed on the way past that the second one had his security card dangling from an attachment point on his backpack. I gave it a quick tug, and with my already considerable momentum, it came off cleanly. Chances were he'd notice and report the card, but it was just a distraction. I still had Natasha's card, and they probably hadn't yet associated it with me. At the top of the stairs, I stopped and changed my features to that of the card holder, or at least as close as I could manage in a few seconds and without a selfie. Then I pushed open the emergency door. 3 Quinlans stood on guard, pistols in hand. One said to me,
"Rick, what's up?"
I bent over, put my hands on my thighs, faked deep, heaving breaths, and tried to gasp a lot.
"Got him."
Pant, pant.
"Need help."
Gasp, pant.
"Too strong."
And I waved in the direction of the stairs while keeping my head down so they couldn't see my face clearly. Apparently my acting chops were pretty good as the trio headed for the stairs, barely glancing at me. As soon as they were out of sight, I went out the maintenance door and made for the wilderness. The good news was that I was free of my pursuers. The bad news was that I was stuck in the Halip's Ending area. They were obviously monitoring the train stations and would probably maintain a guard on them for the foreseeable future. They couldn't cover 400 million stations, of course, but they didn't need to. Without the trains, I was limited to what I could reach on foot or by water. And not even the latter, since I couldn't take a chance on getting Bender's matrix wet. The backpack was under considerable strain with the cube stuffed into it. One popped seam, and that would be it. I could possibly book passage on a boat, but they didn't have passenger lines as such. You paid for deck space on a cargo vessel, and you fed yourself by fishing when hungry. Someone would eventually notice that I wasn't going in the water, and questions would be asked. Plus, there would probably be a bolo out for a Quinlan with a large, lumpy backpack. I needed to stop reacting and form some kind of plan. I found a field of tall grass and waded in a few yards, then plunked myself down. A little back and forth with my butt, and I had a nice nest, out of view of anyone happening by. Then I made a call. "Hey, Hugh?" "Hi, Bob, what's up?" "Things are very interesting right now. Listen, can you arrange a scan of the area around Halip's Ending?" "Sure. Where is Halip's Ending?" "It's near my location." "Sure. Where are you?" "I'm near..." Never mind. I guess I didn't think that through. "Sorry, Bob. Still not enough equipment in the air to do random scans." "Got it. Thanks anyway." That was mildly embarrassing. I suspected I was still suffering from a bit of panic mode. I needed to slow down, calm down, take stock. I gazed up at the fake blue sky filled with real clouds and the occasional flock of birds. Lying there in a field of grass, it would be easy to lose the moment, to imagine myself back in Minnesota on one of those bluebird summer days. Except for the large mountains and the stays holding up the central cylinder, that kind of blew the illusion. The stays. Will's professor friend had said they were used to access the central cylinder. 4 stays, corresponding to the 4 rivers, ran up from the mountains. If I was to get onto one of the other rivers, the Resistance's search radius would become untenable. But could I? Would Natasha's card have access to the elevators up to the central cylinder? Bender had said that he'd spent the last 100 years giving the Resistance hacked access. And why stop with the trains or maintenance complexes? It was that or skulk around the area until they gave up, or try to get somewhere overland, or take a possibly even bigger chance on a boat. Screw it. I'd already gotten into the underground maintenance complex once and escaped. I doubted they'd expect me to go back there first thing. I sent a quick email to Will asking him for any details on the location and accessibility of the transport system up the cylinder stays, then set off yet again for the mountains. At least I knew the way. I peered through the bushes and glared at the single guard standing in front of the maintenance complex access door, trying to burn out his brain with my heat vision. Sadly, no heat vision. The guard stood relaxed, unaware of his brush with death. I could attack him and knock him out, but would he stay out long enough for me to get in and get to the elevator? And what about surveillance cameras? I hadn't found any around the entrance before, but they'd be on full alert now, and they'd only leave a single guard if that guard was being watched. Come on, Bob. James Bond could handle this. I could dig my way into the corridor, but that would take forever and would probably be noticed. I could kill the guard. No, not really. Knocking him out was contraindicated. Bribery was unlikely to work, even if I had something to offer. Distraction? Throw a rock over there, then wait until he investigated? Nah, too cliché for words. He'd probably turn in the opposite direction, expecting an attack. At that moment, a file arrived from Will. I put it on my heads-up and examined the images. It was a SUDAR scan from a segment boundary showing the area at the base of the stay, with inked-in annotations in a non-Bob hand. Probably the professor, but the important thing was that there was just enough detail for me to be able to find the complex's entrance to the transport system up the stays. If I could get in, and if all the segment boundary complexes were identical. I was stymied for the moment, so I might as well do something. I settled for searching for any cameras. Out came the spiders. I also wanted to be ready to move at a moment's notice if an opportunity presented itself, so out came the fleas to infest the door mechanism again, and I moved as close to the door as I could get while remaining hidden. It took very little time to find the camera. Hidden in some foliage, it had been set up to point at the guard's back. So the guard was as much bait as anything. They expected him to be attacked. Nice. And speaking of the guard, he seemed to be getting restless. Over several minutes he glanced around, paced a bit, and scratched himself a few times. I hadn't done anything, so I wasn't sure what was... Oh. Hydraulic pressure, leading to a call of nature. The guard had moseyed over to a nearby bush and was... Holy moly, what was I doing color commentary for? The guard had moved away from the entrance, and he had his back to it. I ordered the fleas to unlock the door, and as quietly as I could, I pulled it and slipped in. A couple of my spiders scurried in behind me, but most of them were left outside, along with most of my fleas. I could wait for them to dig their way in, but while I was doing that, the guard's shift could end, and his replacement could come traipsing up the corridor. Ungood for sure. Nope. I'd have to leave them and hope I didn't come to regret that. This part of the infiltration was almost routine, including the stair door that I'd previously jimmied. I went down one floor, which Will's plans indicated would lead me to the elevator up to the central cylinder. If there were security cameras, I would just have to hope that I looked enough like Natasha to fool them. And then I'd find out how good a hacking job Bender had been doing. 13. Getting busy. Herschel, July 2334, Bellerophon. I got a ping from Will and replied with an invitation. He popped in within a mill. It had been, almost a century since Will had been aboard, even if only in Vert? I'd long since gotten tired of playing with Vert layouts and had reverted to the default library motif. Will barely glanced around. Hi, Herschel. Thanks for having me over. Hey, Will. Long time no see. I hope this isn't going to be as dramatic as the last time. He snorted. No intergalactic battles pending, that I know of anyway, just the usual dull roar whenever humans are involved. I gestured to a chair and called Jeeves. He showed up with a coffee for me and a Coke for Will. You know, your general dislike for humans seems incompatible with the amount of effort you're putting into Valhalla. Will paused to drink his Coke, taking long enough that it was probably a delaying tactic. Honestly, Herschel, it's simply my version of Ragnarok. If things had gone just a bit different back in Epsilon Eridani, I might have been the one to stay there and start a skunk works instead of Bill. I regret that sometimes. Dealing with humans has soured me a bit. Okay, a lot. I nodded slowly, trying to keep my eyebrows from climbing my head. Will was not usually this forthright. Something was up. Okay, you have a solution? Yes. Something I've been working on for a while, the Ever Onward Society, which I understand you've been sniffing around. At least that's what my sources tell me, and you've been fairly public about looking for colony volunteers. I think we've been working in parallel on very similar plans to the point where the urge to scream copyright infringement is almost overpowering. I raised a finger and opened my mouth to respond before I realized I was about to argue copyright law. Instead, I smiled at Will. Okay, you got me reacting. Now give. Going off on a tangent for a moment, you guys have published enough analyses of the Bellerophon so that we could replicate it if we wanted to, except with a working surge drive instead of plates. I started building a slightly smaller version about 50 years ago. I goggled at him. In the 82 Eridani system? And no one noticed? That's a lot of material. He grinned in reply. Well, first, I've been very active with this Valhalla thing, and it takes a lot of effort and material to build all those fractionators and so on. And the colonies have mostly been concentrating on planet-side improvements, so it's not like we're getting in each other's way. Besides, the standard agreement between Bobs and colonies allows us to harvest such materials as may be necessary for activities relating to our original purpose without compensation to the colony. I just never mentioned the side project. Wow, that's lawyerish. And it's still a lot of steel. The standard agreement doesn't set any limits on how much we can take. It's never really come up. I rubbed my eyes and checked metadata. Yep, definitely will. Okay, this is a little mind-boggling, especially coming from you, but I still don't see the connection to us. A couple of things, Herschel. First, your goal appears to be to place a colony far from current human space with no attempt to maintain communications. I get why you want to do that, but I don't think the part about severing communications is necessary. Second, your idea of sending AMI heaven vessels ahead of you is a kludge forced on you by having a bunch of colonists in your belly. Even the original project designers on Earth were reluctant to trust AMIs with that level of executive control. Except China, of course, and look how that ended. Will paused, and I tilted my head and gave him the side-eye. Okay. What I intend to do is spit out ready-made space stations as I pass by systems. The stations decelerate to place themselves in a solar orbit, and we'll have drones on board to do a system survey. AMIs can handle that. And in the event there turns out to be something at all interesting, the stations will include a blank replicant matrix, just ready for a Bob to download into and take over. And if not, we still have an AMI-controlled relay station at every system along my flight path. I nodded slowly. Bob seeds, and you never have to slow down. But again, why tell us? If I lead and you follow, Will replied, then you'll know when I find a good colony target well before you reach that point. And once you've established a colony there, you'll still have a full hold of materials. So from that point on, you can do what you were originally planning. Or do it your way. Will shrugged. Sure, whatever. Why, Will? What's with this urge to head for the edge of the universe? Because this sounds like the same kind of thing Phineas and the others have been doing. And you and Neil, what's your motivation for this? I'm concerned about running into someone or something that can wipe out humanity. We found a lot of intelligent races for the small segment of the galaxy that we've explored. It's only a matter of time until we run into something we can't handle. Will nodded. No disagreement, Hirsch, but don't you find it curious that all the civilizations we've found are or were at about the same age, give or take a few hundred to a few thousand years? No K2s or He-Chi or anything at that level. Don't you wonder why that is? not necessarily. The local stars are all of similar type, similar age, with similar metallicity. There's really only a billion-year or so window when life can develop, so I know where you're going, but I'm talking about a window of a few thousand years. That's a lot more coincidental and nothing more advanced out to as far as we can see. The Dyson dilemma? Will, there's a simple solution to that. With Casimir power sources, civilizations don't have to cluster around their suns, except the others who had a biological imperative. Yeah, but still. Nothing. You don't think we're at the pinnacle of knowledge, do you? I laughed. No, of course not. But it's a pyramid by necessity. The most advanced civilizations at the top will be the smallest group. Not good enough. Will shook his head. At least I don't think so. There's something more at play. But there's no conflict, Hirsch. Your motivation and mine are compatible. Either way, we both want to get humanity more spread out. And while it's laudable that you're going to found a colony or two on the way out, this is still very much a one-way trip for you too, isn't it? Look, I can't speak for Phineas or Ick and Day or any of the other Bobs, but for me, the problem is that I can't shake myself loose. You know why I'm still our rep in the UFS? I laughed. Because everyone knows if no one else volunteers, you'll keep doing it. Will chuckled a little ruefully. I didn't think it was that obvious, but yes, I have this outsized sense of duty. It's my replicative drift, I guess, but they can't expect me to continue to carry it if I'm not around. Wow. I shook my head and thought for a moment. To be honest, I'm coming around to the idea that this maybe isn't some kind of sinister urge taking us over. Bob 1 was looking forward to the adventure when he left Sol that first time. I distinctly remember the feeling. Maybe this is what we've all always wanted, but have gotten distracted out of. Not all of us. I doubt you could get Howard to budge, or the gamers, or Bill for that matter. Yes, they found something else to dedicate themselves to. Original Bob had a strong sense of responsibility as well. You're not that far removed in that way, Will. But in the absence of anything to tie us to one spot, I guess there's a little wanderlust still in all of us. I agree, Will replied. But I don't think it's strictly either or. Guilt can do funny things to people. I nodded. We settled into a mutual silence for a few mills, although I couldn't decide if it was the awkward or companionable variety. Neil popped in at that moment. Will! Long time no see. Come to inspect our research? Will looked surprised, and I controlled the urge to roll my eyes. I couldn't suppress a low growl, though. Research? I waved a hand in dismissal. Well, we do have this large ship full of raw material, and a lot of time on our hands. I hadn't heard anything. We haven't been posting any papers, I said. Neither of us is quite sure why. The best we can come up with is that we're not sure if we want this stuff to be public yet. Oh, now you've really got me curious, Will said. I shot Neil a glare, which he studiously ignored. We'd appreciate it if you'd keep it quiet until we feel ready to do a reveal. I sent Will a guest Manny address, then closed my Vert session and entered my personal Manny. I pulled myself out of the Manny pod. Beside me, Neil was just sitting up. On the other side of him, Will was peering over the edge of the guest Manny's pod. This is the Bellerophon's control cavern, I said to Will, gesturing around us. You've pressurized it? He replied. Just the control cavern. The rest of the ship is still in vacuum. We have to use the airlock if we want to go anywhere else, but that's a minor inconvenience. I lifted off from the pod and hovered a few feet away. Will's eyebrows rose on his head. You appear to be flying in control. I grinned at him. These Mannies have small surge drives, based on the mover plate technology. Very small. Good for maybe a 10th G and not sustainable over planetary distances, at least not yet, but they're perfect for moving around in freefall. I demonstrated by doing a few loops, then returning to my original position. Will grinned, then got that slightly distracted look Manny operators get when they're concentrating on internal systems. Then he shot out of his pod with a whoop, did some barrel rolls, and swooped over to us. "How is this something you'd be reluctant to share? This is awesome!" Neil replied before I could. "This isn't what we're talking about, Will. This is a minor item we implemented for convenience on the Bellerophon. Until we get the surge power up a lot higher, it's not useful for anything but free-fall maneuvering. And I can't think of any situation where Mannies are used right now where this would be useful. Except here, of course." "I bet every Bob in existence would want a turn, though," Will said, still slowly doing loops. "But okay, let's see what you consider to be more than a minor item." I gestured him to follow and headed over to a corner of the cavern where we'd set up our workshop. Walls, cables, pillars, and stanchions had been welded to the deck in whatever random location we'd needed them at the time. Looking at it through fresh eyes, I felt a twinge of embarrassment. It did look somewhat haphazard. But Will didn't seem to mind. He headed, unerringly, for the structure that dominated the work area. It vaguely resembled an oversized Manny pod, but with a lot of science fiction-ish greebles tacked on. I did a quick mental inventory to check if any of those were actually gratuitous. Will would probably ask. He stopped, hovering in front of the pod. "This is impressive. I have no freaking clue what it is, but I like it already." I cocked my head at Neil. "You want to do the honors, or should I?" "You had it last time," he replied. "My turn." I gave Neil a pro forma eye roll, then gestured for him to get on with it. "I'll hold your Manny," I said, and grabbed his arm just as his Manny went slack. Will looked from one of us to the other, perplexed. "He's gone back to Vert?" "Why?" He was interrupted by a door opening on the giant pod. Will floated back several feet as our experimental Manny stepped out and hovered in place. I gestured to it. "This is the X-Man 1, stands for Experimental Mannequin 1. Neil is running it right now." Will's expression was slack with amazement as he examined it. The size and shape were consistent with our standard Bob Mannies, but the X-Man 1 was a mottled silver-gray color. It wore no clothes and had no particular gender. Neil did an exaggerated bow, then slowly rotated in place, grinning the whole while. "So what do you call it?" Will asked. "Instead of X-Man 1, I mean." Neil and I exchanged a glance. Will looked back and forth at us, noting our no doubt shamefaced expressions. "Okay, guys, give. You can't tell me you haven't come up with a nickname." I responded with a sickly smile. "Mannequin Skywalker." Will stared at me for several mills before responding. "You're despicable." He flew over and examined the Manny at close range. "The skin, surface, whatever, it seems to be, moving? It's a little unsettling, to tell the truth." "This Manny," I replied, "is made up entirely of ants, or our adaptation of the ants, to be more precise. We've managed to miniaturize them to about the size of a tardigrade. They link up, kind of like actual cells, and can form any shape we program into them." I grimaced. "We haven't quite got the fine control nailed yet, though. Neil's skin actually is crawling." Will made a face of exaggerated disgust. "Man, I can see someone getting a phobia just being near that thing. For that reason alone, I'd approve of not making it public." "The thing is, Will," I said, "this design can shapeshift. Not quickly yet, but we'll keep improving it. There's no built-in discrete structure as such. Every ant unit is capable of doing any required task by reconfiguring itself. Everything from the SCUT transceiver to the surge drive is built from cooperating units. Skeletal structures are generated by units locking themselves together with double bonds, and so on. The computer core is distributed throughout the structure, as is the power core. There is no Achilles heel, no weak spot. That's a lot of power for a post-human replicant." Will nodded. "Yeah, I get it. Look, when you feel like it's ready for a real demo, let's have the senior Bobs look it over and maybe make a recommendation." "Sounds good." I looked at Neil and tilted my head. He nodded and climbed back into the pod. Will shook his head in wonderment. Wow. This beats Transformers and Space Whales hands down. 14. Getting Out. Bob, July 2334, Heavens River. I don't know what I would have done if I'd run into a security patrol. I no longer had a flechette gun, and needing to be careful about Bender's matrix meant most of my go-to tactics were unavailable. Fortunately, the subject didn't come up. 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 Fortunately, the subject